All right, so we're going to pick up now talking about another motivation, which we've talked about kind of within Maslow as well, but it is so powerful that it kind of deserves its own sub discussion. And this is the idea to belong. Okay, human beings need, besides kind of food and basic other kind of reproductive needs, okay, humans need friends and other people, and we've seen this throughout history. Aristotle talked about the importance of friends. Psychologist Alfred Adler talked about the importance of community. In the Middle English, to be wretched means to be without kin nearby. And throughout history, we've seen other, famous psychologists and famous people talk about this idea of belonging. And what does it mean when we say that? Well, we're talking about being connected to others, part of a group or a family or a community. Now, for humans, there's multiple reasons why we have this need to belong. So the evolutionary psychology perspective kind of talks about seeking bonds with others in ways of survival. For instance, keeping children close to caregivers, mutual protection in a group, cooperating in hunting and sharing food, division of labor allowing to grow food, emotional support to get through crises. So, this need to belong is kind of evolutionarily based because as humans, we really are physically a weak species. So, we've relied on our power of numbers to kind of allow us to flourish in kind of the animal kingdom, in the animal world. So, we've needed, and also just our resources. How did we manage to, farm? How did we manage to hunt successfully? How did we manage to do all these things? Well, a lot of it had to do with the fact that we have this bond, these groups of people. Now, and emotionally, we also know the power of having people close to us. All of you, I'm sure, when you are going through some kind of an emotional crisis, you turn to someone. You need someone to talk to. And when you don't feel like you have someone to talk to, that can be a very isolating feeling, like we discussed when we were talking about Maslow. But it's also a balancing act because you balance this bonding with other needs as well. The need to bond with others is so strong that we can feel lost without close relationships. And if you've ever broken up with a friend, you know the power of that loss. It can be debilitating. So, we do know how vital it is to kind of have that separation from a friend. However, we also seem to need autonomy and a sense of personal competency or efficacy. Self-efficacy is a really important word. It shows up all the time lately on the AP test. And really what it's talking about is you feeling competent. Now, don't confuse this with self-esteem because it's not the same thing as having high self-esteem. Efficacy has to do more with your ability to feel like you can do things, that you can try things, that you're your own person. Okay, so when we bond with others, though, that really is a challenge to balance between those two things because on one sense, we need the friends, we need the bonding, we need the relationships, but on another sense, we also need autonomy. We need to be ourselves. We need to feel like we can do things by ourselves. So it's a very close balance between the two. You could say that there's a tension between me and us, okay? But ideally, these goals can kind of work together if done properly. Because belonging to a group leads to self-esteem and prepares us for confident autonomy. So for instance, the bond you gain in high school and the esteem that you get in high school could oftentimes lead to your confidence to go away to college without all of your friends and feel like you have the ability to make new friends, to try new things, to challenge yourself, to do those kind of autonomous activities as well. Now, the need to belong also leads to loyalty to friends, teams, groups, and families. So, we see that, sometimes the power of the belonging, leads to the tight-knit communities and groups and things that we feel. Which are good most of the time, but there are also ways that we belong to things that aren't necessarily good, or things that we do to belong that aren't necessarily positive things. Things like changing our appearance to an acceptance. Kind of talked about that when we were talking about Maslow, about the pressures that people face to look a certain way, because in our society, unfortunately today, much of our acceptance is based off of our physical appearance. Staying in abusive relationships, joining gangs, nationalist groups, and other violent organizations because that provide you with the sense of belonging that perhaps you're not getting elsewhere. Now, we're going to revisit this idea of the need to belong in our next unit when we talk about social psychology and the power of that us versus them mentality that comes along with belonging to a group. Now, what is social networking doing? Social networking obviously is expanding our ability to belong because it's increasing our social connections. So connecting online can be seen as taking turns reading brief words about each other or as an experience of connection and belonging. And a lot of you, or a lot of, not just you, but this generation, this social networking generation, has created a whole self-identity based off of your social networking presence, your internet-based kind of presence. And studies of this have found that portrayal of oneself online is often close to one's actual sense of self. When we talk about personality, we're going to talk about this real self and ideal self, and how ideally your real and ideal selves are very close together, and what happens if your real and ideal selves are separated, and what kind of struggles that can have. And what we're finding though is that your online presence oftentimes is very close to what we think of, or what you think of as your ideal self, who you're striving to be. And so it could be a real clue for people if you're trying to figure out who do you want to be and where is this disconnect, to look at how are you portraying yourself online versus how do you portray yourself in the real world. Now, the use of social networking, though, can also become a compulsion, sacrificing face-to-face interaction and in-depth conversation. That's one of the things that we are noticing, is the problem that people are losing social skills and they're losing social graces because you're so used to talking to a computer screen that when it comes to real-life discussions, or not being able to think before you type and have to actually have like a conversation with somebody without being able to like pause or not respond to a text message right away or do over some of those other things, that we're losing some of those intricacies. But as a society now, we're just going to have to change and figure out how to do that next. So the need to belong really is a powerful human motivator. And again, we're pulling this out of Maslow because it doesn't show up just in Maslow. It shows up in many other psychologists that we're going to talk about. And we're going to come back to it in our next unit and really look at it in terms of group dynamics and social psychology and how group interactions work.